So, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'm James Berger. I'm the director for the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences at Johns Hopkins. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us today and to welcome you to the dedication of the Brown Advisory Colleagues Professorship in Scientific Innovation in the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and the installation of Dr. Cynthia Wolberger as the inaugural professor. So we're tremendously honored that all of you could join us today. You've dedicated your time to come here as we celebrate this significant milestone. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome and thank you to Ron Daniels, president of Johns Hopkins University, to Dr. Ted DeWeese, interim dean of the medical faculty and chief executive officer of Johns Hopkins Medicine, and to Mike and Ann Hankin and their colleagues from Brown Advisory. Welcome all. Finally, I would also like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Wolberger's family, colleagues, and friends, as well as guests who have signed on and joined us today by live stream this afternoon. We're tremendously proud of Dr. Wolberger in this moment, and we're thrilled to celebrate with her today. So with that, I'd now like to welcome Dean DeWeese to the podium.
James, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all here, and it's a real honor and pleasure and thrill, frankly, to be here today to dedicate this, as James said, the Brown Advisory Colleagues Professorship in Scientific Innovation in the IBBS, and its most worthy inaugural recipient, our friend and colleague, Dr. Cynthia Wolberger. Congratulations, Cynthia. And I absolutely want to take just a moment to very specifically thank Mike and Ann Hankin and all the colleagues from Brown Advisory who are here or online for this moment, for this day, and for your recognition of just how important basic sciences are to Johns Hopkins, the discovery of our outstanding scientists and what that means for what we do for the world. So thank you very, very much. I've had the good fortune of knowing Mike and Ann for some number of years. Our sons went to high school together. Ann and I just chatting about that, and that's just been very lovely. I've also had the great pleasure of knowing Mike on the JHM board in his role as vice chair of that board, and so that's been a real fabulous set of relationships for all those years too. But really, thank you both for your dedication, continued dedication to the Johns Hopkins community. Mike hasn't just done that. He's been a trustee in the university board. You were at the APL, forgot what that's called. No, got that part. The Applied Physics Lab. Thank you, President Daniels. The advisory board, I'm not sure that's right. Board of Visitors.
Board managers.
God. Okay, I'll work on that, thank you. Board of Managers for the APL. So thank you for that, Mike. And I know, Ann, you served for some time in the Children's Center on that leadership council, and thank you for helping our Children's Center, which, by the way, ranked in the top 10 this year, just saying, but helping to really drive that to really meet its most highest aspirations for managing kids. So thank you for that. 10 years ago, a decade ago, Mike had a conversation but it was very similar, which I think kind of culminated in really today in many ways. I've learned, I wasn't there for that, he was having a conversation with Carol Greider, who was formerly at Hopkins director of molecular biology and genetics, as well as Steve Desiderio, who was in James' previous role as the director of the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences, and having that conversation to maybe more fully understand and appreciate what it means so much to me, which is Johns Hopkins is not Johns Hopkins without very strong basic biomedical research and the outstanding people who do it. And Mike and Ann, through that conversation, thank you, 10 years ago, dedicated the Mike and Ann Hankin and Partners Professorship in Scientific Innovation in the IBBS. Steve Desiderio was holding that, and now our friend James Berger holds that particular professorship. So here we are a decade later with that same vigor and dedication. Again, so Ann and Mike, thank you for what you continue to do. The beauty of endowed professorships, of course, is that they provide that sort of duality of some stability which then allows the creativity and the stability because those faculty members who hold them don't have to be as focused, still have to be focused, Cynthia, don't have to be as focused on generating levels of support for their salary and research, which if they're not doing that, then they can do what it is we hope they do, be very creative with their science, train the next generation of leaders, which is what Johns Hopkins does. And so that's why these endowments are really that important. And of course, this could not be given to a more worthy person, frankly, who embodies, I think, what is the best of Johns Hopkins scientists, and that's Dr. Wolberger. As many of you know, she's the professor and the director of the Department of Biophysics and Biophysical Chemistry, and her work has been outstanding. She wouldn't even know, I've actually read some of it before, and because I had some interest long ago in gene regulation, particularly as it was relating to some immunotherapy kinds of stuff, and how is it that a particular protein called ubiquitin helps to interact with the genome and drive regulation there. Also, from the things that I do in cancer, trying to kill cells, and sometimes they don't die in the way you think they do. They die by a certain pathway called autophagy, and there's ubiquitin that's involved in that. And so anyway, it's really very important work, and her work has absolutely transformed that element of the field. But really, I think more than that is the things that we think about as a clinician on my clinician hat is, does it translate directly into helping people? And it's doing that as it thinks about drug development. And so Cynthia's work's just been fantastic. She's been on our faculty since 1991 doing this kind of work. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, most recently a member of the National Academy of Medicine, in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and in the Biophysical Society. So there are smart people at Hopkins. And then there are the very smart people at Hopkins. And then there's Cynthia and one or two others. Some of us are way on the other side of this graph, but there she is over there. So that's all you have to really know. She's selected as the recipient of this professorship, of course, for these important research accomplishments, Cynthia, but also because of what you embody for us and your leadership. And I have the good fortune of working with her and listening to her voice around the table. And it truly matters to the decisions we make and how we govern the place. So again, my really sincere thanks to Mike, to Ann, to the Brown Advisory team for their leadership of this, but also for what you also do in the Baltimore community. I just saw you guys were hosting a horse thing this weekend, which I know nothing about, but it seemed pretty cool, actually. But it's really an honor and a privilege, Mike and Ann, to both know you personally, certainly professionally, and for what you have continued to do for Johns Hopkins, so thank you for that. So endowments to the university are held and administered by the university, and thus we have to formally present them to the university. I will do so to President Daniels. So President Daniels, on behalf of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, I present to you, as president, the Brown Advisory Colleagues Professorship in Scientific Innovation in the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences. Congratulations.
Thanks, Ted. So thank you, Ted. I'm delighted, of course, to join you all as we honor Dr. Cynthia Wolberger as the inaugural Brown Advisory Colleagues Professor in Scientific Innovation in the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences. And of course, without any further ado, I'm absolutely thrilled to accept this professorship. Before I begin my remarks, I want to focus a little bit on Mike, but Ted, I'm just trying to get the taxonomy. So there's really smart people at Hopkins. They're really, really smart. And there's Cynthia. I got all that. Where exactly do you see Central University Administration on that grid?
We're not answering.
That's what I feared. Good to see you all. Several years ago, when Mike Hankin helped launch the Waterfront Partnership of Baltimore and the Healthy Harbor Initiative, he pledged to make our city's prized inner harbor both swimmable and fishable. This was a tall order, and Mike knew full well the demands of such a massive endeavor, as well as the sustained multi-generational impact it would have across Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay region. But he made another pledge as well. He promised that once the industrial toxins had been removed, the sewage leaks had been plugged, all of them, and the loose cannonballs had been plucked from the depths. He, Mike Hankin, would be among the very first people to don a snorkel and test out the waters. Now, Mike hasn't yet taken the plunge, but he's getting close. And I know just from Mike's track record, he won't let up until the harbor is ready for him. This is really classic Mike. When Mike commits to something, he moves not only with determination and haste, but with an eye to the gains to be found in sticking with something for the long term and seeing it to fruition. He doesn't just preach this, he lives it. As colleagues who are here today from Brown would know, and those on the Zoom, he lives it, believing that change-driven leadership isn't accompanied through jeremiads or soliloquies, but just through quiet action. Indeed, there are few people more holistically committed than Mike and Anne to the foundational work of supporting institutions, building institutions, nourishing institutions in our city. And we can see their handiwork in so many different places, from the Bryn Mawr School to the Baltimore Zoo and so on. And this ethos radiates in Mike's leadership of Brown Advisory, a bastion of investment management that is truly, proudly, and we hope forever, anchored in Baltimore and in the vision of Brown Advisory partners whose generosity has made this professorship possible today. Fortunately for all of us at Hopkins, as Ted indicated a moment ago, we also see the same perspective in Mike's service to our university. As University Emeritus Trustee, Vice Chairman of the Johns Hopkins Medicine Board of Trustees, former Chair of the Board of Managers of our Applied Physics Lab, Mike has helped spearhead efforts close to home, the outer reaches of our solar system, from our economic inclusion initiative, Be Local, to historic technological feats like the Parker Solar Probe and the DART mission. Mike has just been an indefatigable champion of all of these various efforts and just pours his heart, his whole soul into these. This professorship, made possible by Mike and a number of other folks at Brown Advisory, is an extension of Mike's vision for the future of our institution that will accelerate investments in basic science, the full benefit of which may not be seen for years or decades, but we know they'll come. And few are better poised to demonstrate the promise of basic science than this professorship's inaugural recipient, Dr. Cynthia Wolberger. An expert in the fields of structural biology, gene regulation, and ubiquitin signaling, Dr. Wolberger is advancing our collective understanding of the building blocks of life, or as she has put it, the hows, the whys, and the whens of our genes. She has peeled back the curtain on complex DNA packaging proteins and telltale chemical tags that spur them into action, including the ubiquitin protein, how the ubiquitin protein can signal the repair of broken DNA and activate or deactivate genes within a single cell. Because of Dr. Wolberger in our lab, our world gets ever closer to understanding how diseases operate on a molecular level, with the potential to yield new, more targeted approaches to a range of different challenges, but including, of course, treatment-resistant cancers. And as director of the Department of Biophysics and Biophysical Chemistry at Hopkins Medicine, the first woman at Hopkins to hold this role, she is setting our university on a trajectory to fulfill our historic role as a leader in basic sciences, whether by supporting our new life sciences building in East Baltimore, advancing gender parity in STEM, or inspiring other faculty to follow her lead as a mentor to generations of scientists. So to Cynthia, thank you for the passion with which you are driving the future of basic biomedical sciences as a consummate scholar, educator, and mentor for the great benefit of our institution and well beyond. And to Mike, Ann, and all those at Brown Advisory, thank you too for supporting the basic sciences at Hopkins in the here and now, but also for imagining with vision and conviction the fruits that these investments will bear in the years ahead. Mike, we know, wait for it, you're always ready to take the plunge, and we're proud to do it alongside you, though I have to confess that first harbor swim, I'll be cheering from the shore. With that, thank you all and congratulations again.
So, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ted. I, too, would very much like to reiterate my profound gratitude to Mike and Ann Hankin and Brown Advisory for making this day possible. As you've heard, endowed professorships are really critical for research excellence and academic research. They allow faculty to really chart new directions in their lab, to take risks in research, and they recognize outstanding achievement and excellence. I think, as has been mentioned, what makes this professorship particularly important is that it's really dedicated to basic life science research, and I can't underscore that enough. And that means that it's recognizing the fact that we can't develop cures for tomorrow if we don't first discover fundamental underpinnings of life and biology today. And that is the perfect lead-in to Dr. Wolberger's, I'm going to say Cynthia because now we're getting the personal comments, Cynthia's accomplishments. Simply put, she has been a trailblazer from the get-go. Her work has led to multiple breakthroughs in understanding one of the most ancient and fundamental processes in the cell, namely gene regulation. Now, you've heard that term already, gene regulation, but I thought I'd put it into a little bit of context because we're not all scientists here, I know that. And it's important to understand that in living organisms, right, we know that DNA encodes the genetic information that makes us us. It's everything that the cell needs to synthesize RNAs, to ultimately make proteins, to ultimately make biomolecules. It's all encoded in DNA. So the underpinnings of all construction and operation of a cell comes from DNA. And the principal coding units in our genomes are known as genes. And the readout or expression, as we call it, of these genes must be exquisitely controlled to build a healthy organism and to prevent disease. The regulation of gene expression, this process, is heavily dependent on special proteins that bind to DNAs and nucleic acids, known as transcription factors. And these tell cells which RNAs to make and which proteins ultimately to make, and which should be synthesized so that a cell can do what it's supposed to do. In addition to this, though, there are also these special enzymes, proteins themselves typically, that will chemically attach special tags. We call them post-translational modifications. And they will attach them to a special type of DNA wrapping protein known as a histone that further controls this level and choreography of gene expression. So Cynthia has really profoundly impacted our understanding of how living organisms express this chemical code that's embedded in DNA. In her early work, she used a complex but powerful method known as X-ray crystallography, which involves shining very intense beams of X-rays on tiny crystals of these biological molecules that you've coaxed through a lot of effort into forming a crystal. You shine those X-rays on, and with those X-rays, you can literally image the three-dimensional organization of all the atoms in that molecule you're looking at. We're talking tens to hundreds of thousands of atoms in a very precise geometric relationship to one another. So we can see that through X-ray crystallography. And Cynthia used this process, which, as I mentioned, is laborious and fraught with a lot of risk, because you can't image the molecule if you don't have the crystals. You're sort of stuck. She's imaged that with a lot of these DNA binding proteins bound to their target sequence. And she was able to, in her early stages, and then later on as she grew her lab, consistently image some of the most challenging biomolecules that our cells make. And I think this really speaks volumes to her skills as a researcher, but also to a mentor, because you have to train postdocs and students in this very complicated method. Moreover, you have to sell them on doing these experiments, which are not for the faint of heart. And so you have to be able to coax them to say, don't worry, you'll get it to work, I promise, even when you're sitting there saying, I hope this will really work. So Cynthia was really masterful at that. And she was able to then, by looking at these structures of these molecules, use that information to gain really deep insights into how the proteins do what they do. How do they recognize a specific sequence of base pairs in our DNA from other sequences that aren't the correct one? And then how do they use that to bind and control how these genes are ultimately going to be expressed through other kinds of machineries like RNA polymerase? Now, that was sort of early stage and mid stage, and as time went on, Cynthia became interested in understanding not just this protein-DNA interaction, but also how these enzymes I mentioned that attach these chemical tags actually do their job. And it's not just attaching tags, and these are various molecules of different kinds, it's also removing those tags in special ways. So she's now adapted her methodology. She no longer only does crystallography. She's actually branched into a new approach called cryo-electron microscopy, which is another powerful method for imaging the three-dimensional structures of proteins. It doesn't require crystals, which is good because that speeds work along, or can speed work along, and it lets you work on bigger, more complicated things. So with this, Cynthia's been able to image the fundamental building blocks of how our genome is shaped and wrapped. These are using proteins called histones, and they form these larger complexes called nucleosomes. She can see what those look like, and then she can see how these enzymes are docking and attaching to this to attach these tags in very specific ways. And these tags can be small, they can be just a few atoms, or they can be quite large, as we've heard already, things like ubiquitin, which is about a 50, 60-ish amino acid protein, so they can be hundreds of amino acids or so. And so by visualizing this, Cynthia is actually helping to code something that we call the epigenetic code, which is sort of a fancy way of saying the code on top of a code. If we think of DNA as being our genetic code, that's the chemical code that's hardwired in our cells. The epigenetic code is the malleable portion. It's what you inherit from, not just from your mom and from your dad, but you also inherit it from your environment, from what the cells happen to encounter, and it can be written and overwritten and rewritten. And this is a frontier area. In fact, we have a Bloomberg Distinguished Cluster professors, a cluster of Bloomberg Distinguished Professors that are going to be hired in this area of epigenetics. It's really one of the areas of science that's still quite a black box, but it's quite exciting. And Cynthia's already been hard at work figuring out aspects of how this code works, and in doing so, she's really rewriting the textbooks in terms of how some of these tags get put on, how they get taken off, and importantly, how some of the enzymes that when they malfunction give rise to disease, what they look like, and how we can maybe target them therapeutically. So it's really highly significant. Now, in the course of this, it's not just her innovative and impactful science that we're honoring today that stand out. As you've already heard, Cynthia's had an illustrious trajectory. It includes publishing over 100 highly influential papers in the field. She's been marked by the highest forms of recognition from her peers, including she was an investigator of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute for several decades. You've heard about her memberships in the national academies. You've heard about the fellows positions that she's won with important societies. She's also received the Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin Award from the Protein Society, and she's also received an American Association for Cancer Research Award for outstanding achievement in chemistry and cancer research. You've also heard that Cynthia has long been a force in our community. I would emphasize force, because if you know Cynthia, you know force. As an educator, she's mentored numerous students and postdocs, and many of them have gone on to run their own research groups, both in academia and in industry. She's routinely and selflessly answered the call from the university for service, both from the university and from the scientific community, serving on study sections, even chairing study sections while she chairs our department. She chairs our department, which we're very grateful for. That's a tremendous administrative burden, herding cats, but one for which we're extremely grateful that she's answered the call. So I'll just wrap up by saying that Cynthia has really made a number of unparalleled contributions that make her the ideal choice for the inaugural Brown Advisory Colleagues Professorship in Scientific Innovation at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. We're really deeply in debt to Mike and Ann Hankin and Brown for their continued support of the basic science. And I'm thrilled that Cynthia was chosen for this honor, because I know she's going to set a very high bar for future recipients. So thank you.
That is a tough act to follow, James. Thank you. And so I think this paradigm is going to be used a lot. Smart, smarter, very smart. Where do you put trustees?
Ask Ron.
Yeah. So it's great to be here. I love being in this room. It's one of my favorite rooms on the Hopkins Medicine campus. And I was sitting there thinking about the vision that these people had behind us, and Mary Elizabeth Garrett over there. So just a couple things to get out of the way. It is possible that in September, something happened in the harbor. And it was recorded in a documentary that's being produced that might come out soon. I can't tell you exactly what happened, but I just checked my temperature, heartbeat. I don't have anything funny growing on me, so just wait and see, and you won't need to be the first person now. So, but it's really exciting. I will say just that the harbor here is exceedingly clean against any measurement, which is really, really exciting. So I just want to thank my colleagues from Brown Advisory here. We've got a number of people who have played a role at Hopkins, Johns Hopkins, Ben Griswold, Charlie Constable on the Carey Advisory Board, Ken Susan on the Bayview Board. We also have a number of younger colleagues that we invited to have a chance to meet folks from Hopkins and to see what it takes to help support people do the great things that happen in this place. I also want to call out my partner of 26 years, Dave Churchill, my right arm and left arm CFO, COO at Brown Advisory, and he has done a lot of things at the firm, but especially when I said to Dave, can we figure out how to do another professorship? Dave figured it out. So it's hard to believe it's been 5 years since we dedicated the first professorship. And obviously a lot's happened in the world. Lots happened at Johns Hopkins. I mean, just last week, the dedication of a fantastic building on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. But the same things that brought us here 5 years ago bring us here today. We, at Brown Advisory, we care deeply about the community. We care about Johns Hopkins medicine. And we care about thinking long-term. And this is a big part of who we are. Earlier this year, we celebrated our 25th anniversary as a private and independent firm. And 25 years, it's our goal to celebrate many, many more being private and independent. And when we think about it, we didn't celebrate our growth. We celebrated what being private, what being independent meant for our clients, meant for our colleagues, and meant for the communities in which we live and work. Number one, being private and independent means putting our clients first, always. Number two, thinking long term. And when I think about this institute, those are the words that come to mind, because you're the folks that are applying fundamental research across disciplines without the pressure of producing an immediate solution. That's the difference that you all bring to Johns Hopkins, to medical research, and to hope for the future. And this was the conversation, Ted, that I had or I learned from listening to Carol, and motivated me and others to come back from that meeting and say, how can we help? Led to the professorship that we dedicated 5 years ago, Brown Advisory Partners, and this one now. It's tremendously exciting to be here, to name it for our colleagues, to have that connection to people who are doing incredibly important work. So it's an honor and privilege to be here. We're excited for you. We're excited for the future. Thank you very much.
thank you for that, very much so. And it is not an overstatement to say how much Brown Advisory means to this community. It has for many decades so far, and I'm sure for many more, and what, again, you and Ann have done for us, so thank you for that. As I noted earlier, professorships are among the highest honors that the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine can bestow upon one of our faculty members. And as I also noted, they are vital for a variety of reasons, that stability and creativity piece, but it allows faculty to pursue those passions that they have if they're clinicians, or if they are educators, or in this case, scientists, to advance the world and to do what we do to improve the human condition. And people like Cynthia, fortunately for people like me, shine a lot of bright light on us. So Cynthia, thank you for that. So please, join me. So Dr. Wolberger, on behalf of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, I'm pleased to present to you this medallion as a symbol of this honor and in celebration of your installation as the inaugural recipient of the Brown Advisory Colleagues Professorship in Scientific Innovation in the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences. Congratulations, Cynthia.
Thank you. Well, really, thank you from the bottom of my heart. So this is really an honor to receive this professorship, and thank you. I'd like to thank all of you. So first, my deepest thanks to Mike and Ann Henkin and to the Brown Advisory colleagues for your generosity and for your support of basic science and the recognition of how important it is. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today. Thank you, James, for that embarrassing introduction. I feel I need to live up to it more now that I have my work cut out for me, ahead of me. And thank you, Ted, and thank you, Ron. And really, I'd like to thank, this is the thank you part. So really, thank you all my department colleagues. I have the privilege of working with a wonderful group of faculty and students and postdocs and staff in the Department of Biophysics and Biophysical Chemistry, and I want to give a special shout out to members of my lab. I see guys in the back there who are just a wonderful group to, wonderful group to work with. I'd like to thank you, all these colleagues from Johns Hopkins who've made it here today, and I want a special thanks, last and not least, to my family, my husband, Jeff Adams, my daughter, Rachel, and my son, Joshua. So Hopkins is really a very special place, as I learned when I first joined the Department of Biophysics and Biophysical Chemistry. And when people ask me, what is it that makes Johns Hopkins different and stand out? My answer is collegiality. This is truly the most collegial institution that I've ever either been at or visited. And I really think that we are absolutely number one in that regard. This collegial environment has provided an exceptional environment for research that we've done in our laboratory, and it's nurtured the careers of many students and postdoctoral fellows over the years. So the endowed chair you've established is supporting research in my lab, and I won't go into any detail since James went into detail and told you all about it. But we study the molecular mechanism by which genes are regulated, and especially the role of our favorite protein, ubiquitin. So the chair comes at a really exciting time. We've been able to use this new cutting-edge technology, cryo-electron microscopy, which has really changed the way we study these macromolecular machines, and has allowed us to be more ambitious in the kinds of machines that we could study. And I really want to special thanks to School of Medicine for purchasing all the extremely expensive equipment that we need to do this, and for establishing a state-of-the-art cryo-EM facility, and for supporting that. I mean, this has been critical to our work and the work of many of my colleagues here. Another exciting development has really been the application of artificial intelligence to protein structure prediction. And so that's why I was really thrilled, the new AI initiative that's been announced, because that will really impact directly what we do. I mean, the new computational tools that have come out, this is barely 2 years ago and it's still developing. have dramatically altered the way we do science already and really have opened new possibilities that we didn't even know enough to dream about. So the chair that you've endowed will enable us to do high-risk, high-reward science that funding agencies don't support. I think pretty much all of us here who've ever written a grant, or maybe who've had their first grant rejected, have learned not to put our most ambitious ideas in our NIH proposals or others because of the conservative nature of the funding process. And so this endowed chair will allow us to venture into new areas and try new approaches that could yield new breakthroughs. Now, as you all sit here today in this beautiful room, I'd like to draw your attention to these two portraits that we have the privilege of having here. So both of these paintings are by John Singer Sargent. For anyone who doesn't know, he is a super famous artist. You can find his work in all the major museums in the United States, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the National Gallery, and so on and so forth. So the portrait behind me is of the 4 founding physicians of the School of Medicine. So Doctors Osler, I'm not sure who is which, but there's maybe left to right, Osler, Halsted, Welch, and Kelly. Now this portrait was commissioned by the woman whose portrait you see here, Mary Elizabeth Garrett. So Mary Elizabeth Garrett is the benefactress that made the School of Medicine possible. So the money that was the investments left from Johns Hopkins turned out weren't quite enough to fulfill his goal of having established a School of Medicine. And so they had to seek additional funding, additional donors. And the donor they found was Mary Elizabeth Garrett, whose money they first didn't want to take because there were a lot of strings attached. In particular, one of the strings was that they admit women on equal basis as men. So there were not co-ed medical schools at the time. And they balked at first. I think they quintupled the amount of money they said actually that she would need to give. She came up with it, raising it from some other women friends here in Baltimore, and they accepted it, and then accepted her terms of admitting women from the very beginning. So it's really a special honor to accept this professorship under the gaze of this benefactor who was a champion for women. Now, when I was preparing my remarks, I went online and looked a little bit at the Department of the History of Medicine here at Hopkins to make sure I had all my facts right about who paid for what. And I learned that some in the School of Medicine were actually miffed by this picture here because there were no basic scientists that were included in the portrait. And they went on to raise money to commission portraits of John Jacob Abel, who was the founder of the Department of Pharmacology, and Franklin Mall, who was the first anatomy professor. So thank you, Mike and Ann, and thank you, Brown advisory colleagues, for including basic scientists in the picture, and for your support of basic research. The chair you've endowed establishes a legacy that will pass on to future basic scientists here at School of Medicine and will support the exciting research of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. So, on behalf of myself, the entire Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, I very much would like to thank all of you again who have joined us today, whether in person or virtually. Your unwavering support and dedication have made this installation ceremony an unforgettable event. I would like to reiterate my special thanks to Ron Daniels, President of Johns Hopkins University, to Dr. Ted DeWeese, Interim Dean of the Medical Faculty, Chief Executive Officer of Johns Hopkins Medicine, for their presence today and ongoing encouragement and strong support. To Dr. Wolberger's family, colleagues, friends, we extend a warm welcome and commend you for your pivotal role in helping her in her journey to get here today, especially the family. I know there's been a lot of travel involved sometimes. Your support and your belief in her groundbreaking work has undoubtedly contributed to this momentous achievement. And finally, once again, we really would like to extend our profound gratitude to Mike and Ann Hankin, partners of Brown Advisory, its leadership, for their exceptional generosity, their resolute dedication to championing fundamental scientific research at Johns Hopkins. As we conclude this ceremony, I would like to invite all of you to join us in celebrating the milestone at the reception behind us, where we can pay tribute to the accomplishments of Dr. Wolberger, the inaugural professor of the Brown Advisory's Colleagues Professorship in Scientific Innovation in the Institute for Basic Biomedical Sciences. Thank you once again for being part of this great moment.